Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and this is Disaster Zone, a show about emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. Training to respond to an active shooter at a place like a school, it used to be an unheard of event. But today, it's commonplace, and many emergency responders actively drill for live shooter events. This is footage from a drill in Maple Valley, Washington. We're talking today with King County Sheriff John Urquhart. And John, Sheriff, thanks for being on the program. We've been wanting to do this for a while.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here.
Yes. Certainly, we could probably talk a lot longer than a half hour about these issues of gun violence, mass shootings, why now, but we're going to cover some of these and get to it. And why don't we just say, gun violence appears to become almost routine in our 21st century society. Is gun violence actually up, or is there just more national media coverage of every incident that involves multiple victims?
Well, I think multiple victim shootings, mass shootings, are certainly on the forefront of everybody, and it gets a tremendous amount of news coverage. Yeah. And social media contributes to that as well. Certainly homicides are way down. I mean, it's the lowest homicide rate in the country in years and years and years and years. Okay. But these mass shootings.
And what's a mass shooting?
The FBI defines that as more than 4 victims.
Okay.
We read about the terrible ones, Columbine and Sandy Hook, and those are multiple. But mass shootings happen on a relatively frequent basis when you use that definition.
Right here in King County, is it up, down, even?
It's not really up. We haven't had any school shootings like they have in other parts of the country. So we're, knock on wood, we're happy about that. Yeah. But as you say, it could happen tomorrow. It could happen at any point in time, and the police have to train for that, have to be ready for that. Yeah. And the public does as well. It's not just training us, my deputies, it's training the public, which we also do.
Just thinking about this, when I look at where mass shootings happen, and in schools, for schools themselves, generally it's not the urban setting where these things have occurred. They've been more in the types of jurisdictions you have responsibilities in a suburban or even rural setting. Any thoughts on that aspect of it?
If I could figure out why mass shootings occur, if we could identify the perpetrators early on, we'd be in great shape. I don't know why they tend to be, as you say, in rural areas, or at least not in the inner city, which is where we think they might occur. Yeah. They just haven't. They haven't happened yet, but they certainly could.
I don't know what schools use here in major metropolitan. I know New York City, they actually have metal detectors and all that. Is that something you think is helpful or not?
I hope we never come to that. I hope we never come to a situation where going to school for a child, in whether it's in middle school, elementary school, or in high school, ends up like us getting on an airplane where you have to go through a metal detector. We don't want that. And certainly we're not there yet. And we're going to work to make sure we don't end up in that situation. Now we have school resource officers. In many schools, we have police officers in schools, but they're not there specifically to deter shooters or incidents or to arrest kids. Right. Sometimes that happens. But for the most part, they are there to have a presence, to interact with the kids, to break down those barriers between kids, basically, and the police.
So it's community policing inside the school.
It's exactly community policing inside schools, yes.
The first school shooting that really had national prominence was Columbine High School in Colorado. And I think one of the reasons that at any time there's something that's played out on TV, that visual effect seems to have a lot more impact than not having the visual piece to that. But following that incident, there's been a continuing series of school-related shootings, culminating, and at least in my mind, it's the horrific shootings at Sandy Hook, where you have elementary schools, first, second graders being killed. It'd be great if we could figure that out, but what do you attribute this phenomenon happening, following Columbine,
Well, Columbine is so interesting from a lot of different scenarios, not the least of which is how the police responded then and now, and we can talk about that. But I can't think of a school shooting prior to Columbine, and yet all of us can name several since Columbine, and ones that were averted at the last minute, if nothing else. we don't know what's caused that. We still have mentally ill people, but by the same token, we've had a breakdown in our mental illness system since then. The police, we used to, when a police officer encountered someone who was mentally ill, we called the guys in the white coats. Now we are the guys in the white coats, and we are not trained or equipped to understand those situations, although we're getting better. But clearly a breakdown in the fabric of how we treat people that are mentally ill, or specifically in crisis, mentally ill and in crisis in this country. So that's a huge problem. But I also think there is a copycat syndrome going on here, where people see that and they want to emulate what had happened because of how they think. Lanza in Newtown, he had researched all mass shootings. He had a whole computer library of mass shooting incidents. So clearly he had looked at them and probably was doing a copycat situation.
Combined with certainly being very mentally unstable, and I don't know whether he's autistic. I can't remember what the diagnosis
I think autism was part of it, but he clearly had evolved into an unstable situation. And that day and other days he was in crisis, and he acted out by killing 20 kids and 6 adults.
And starting with his own mother.
Starting with his own mother, that's exactly right.
So it's not only schools, though. I mean, workplaces have seen workplace violence, and generally this is a disgruntled worker. I think I heard something on the radio today, or I saw it, some disgruntled worker somewhere in the nation today went back to work and just shot at the building. They didn't go inside, thankfully, from that. But women are also significantly at risk for workplace violence from relationships that people coming to work trying to do them harm. What are your thoughts on that whole aspect of this?
Workplace violence is very interesting because we focus so much on school violence because there's kids involved. But think back even before Columbine, there was a term that we used to use. And it was a flip term. It was called going postal, because we had several incidents at mail facilities where a mail worker would come back and shoot up his workplace, and we called it going postal. And we still use that occasionally for workplace violence, even though it doesn't include mail facilities. But they come back and they kill their bosses, their former bosses, after they've been terminated, typically, or they come back and they kill their spouse. And that's a manifestation of domestic violence and how terrible domestic violence can work its way out. And sometimes it ends up in a workplace shooting, even though it's not necessarily a mass shooting, but coming into a workplace and killing your spouse. That's the reason in this very building where we are today, you have metal detectors because of the killing that occurred where 4 people were killed when they came into the courthouse with a gun.
Right, including an unborn baby.
Including an unborn baby, that's exactly right. That. So that's part and parcel to this whole problem of either school shootings, mass shootings, or workplace violence. And they're all a little bit different, but in some ways they're all the same. Okay.
So what would you say to a school principal or a small, medium-sized business that one of the employees comes in and says, hey, I want you to know I filed a restraining order against a no contact, legal term, against my spouse, and that person is extremely angry, and I want you to know that it could be an issue of him or her even coming here to work. What would you tell that supervisor? Think, okay, when you're told this, anything to do different?
Well,
other than being aware of it?
I think that's really what it boils down to is being aware of that. If you're in that situation in your life, you need to let people know so that they can look out for you. So if that person is seen lurking around the building, for example, they know that there could be an issue. Those type of things are very important. So they can call 911 if they see that person. Okay. But keeping it to yourself is not good. You need to let your coworkers or certainly your boss know.
The other aspect of this violence has actually been perpetrated on law enforcement themselves. I mean, there's been a number of high-profile attacks, ambushes. Even I remember a state patrol officer doing a stop, and unfortunately was killed in that incident right here in Washington. But the Lakewood incident was really horrific. I think it was 4 officers killed. specifically in that. And how are you preparing your own King County deputies to be alert, prepared for acts of violence against them?
Well, Lakewood 4, for example, they're on a Sunday morning having coffee at the coffee shop, and a gentleman, not a gentleman,
Yeah.
a suspect comes in and kills all 4 of them. Timothy Brenton was sitting in his car doing paperwork, and a guy pulls up next to him and shoots him.
And that was locally.
That was locally, right here in the city of Seattle,
Yeah.
a mile from where we are today. New York City, it's happened. 2 officers sitting in their patrol car were ambushed. So it does happen. It's part and parcel to the job. There's only so much training we can do, and we do training where there are ways to avoid that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into that here, but we talk about that on a regular basis. And it's, I guess, the biggest thing that we tell our officers and deputies is to be alert. Pay attention to your surroundings. It's what we tell citizens all the time, so
Yeah.
they're not victims of crime. But in our case, it's could be a victim of a homicide.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's unavoidable, but there are things that my deputies can do, and we talk about that.
Has that always been part of the training, or has it been incorporated more in recent years?
It's always been part of the training, but it brings it home more now. We can point to specific examples that have occurred right here in our jurisdiction.
How about touching on the impact that Columbine had on how law enforcement, fire, emergency medical services respond to an active shooter event where something on shootings actually describe it before Columbine and then briefly,
Well, not
what's
only
changed?
for police, not only first responders, but the public as well. But let me talk about first responders. At Columbine, they did what they've always done. Is patrol officers get there first because they get the 911 call. They set up a perimeter around the building, and they wait for the SWAT team to get there because the SWAT team has got the training and the equipment, the experience to go into that building
right.
and secure it. And that's always worked fine until Columbine in 1999. They had 2 shooters in there, and while we, the first responders, were set up around the building, they're still killing people. And a number of people, we find out later, were killed while they waited half hour, 45 minutes, several hours before any police officer went into that building.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore. I don't think anybody in the country, any police officer in the country, does that anymore. Our goal now, our training now, is for the first 2, 3, 4 officers on the scene. They go into that building, and their goal is to do 2 things. Either kill that shooter, because by definition he is still shooting, or take him into custody.
Yeah.
And they go straight to where those gunshots are coming from. And that was a huge change in everything we had ever done before. And now we train that way.
Yeah.
We train, and you're going to be paired up with somebody that you may not even know, may not even have worked with before. But that's why the training is so important. So everybody does the same thing, but you go in there and you stop that shooter before he can kill more people.
Yeah, it's not to treat any victims you come across either.
No, you're going to pass over those victims. So that's what the police do.
Yeah.
We've also retrained the fire department because the fire department, they would show up and they'd stage a block or 2 away.
Right.
We'd go in there and we'd take out the shooter, and then we'd search the building for other shooters 2, 3, or 4 times, and we'd move kids, for example, and it could be anywhere, but certainly at a school, and then we'd bring the fire department in. We call it the cold zone. Nothing's going on. We know it's cold. We don't do that anymore, at least in this area. But we're at the forefront of this. We now train with the fire department, and we bring them into the warm zone to treat patients. And the warm zone it's defined as, well, the shooter isn't there, but he could be in another part of the building, or we haven't found him yet. And these fire department responders are specially trained, and they go in with us. But their goal is to go in there when it's not totally safe yet and get those victims out of there and to a hospital, because that will save lives. People have died while the fire department waited outside. People have died because we've waited outside, and we want to put a stop to that.
Okay, almost a combat medic aspect.
It's exactly a combat medic situation. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a break now, but before our break, I'd like to do is show our audience the Run, Hide, Fight video, which I think is a great asset. I'll let you tee it up, and then we'll toss it back to them. And so what is the Run, Hide, Fight video?
It's the advice that we give people, civilians, that find themselves in an active shooter situation.
Okay. And so for you folks at home, watch this message. We hope you never have to be in it, but take this to heart and share it with other members of your family also, so they know what to do. And we'll be right back after this with more from King County Sheriff John Urquhart.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference: run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly.
Left, slice and get my back.
The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us here on Disaster Zone, today we're talking with King County Sheriff John Urquhart about mass shootings. And again, John, let's pick it up where we left off here. And, you know, wasn't that long ago that about the only alternative an officer had to the pistol, handgun that he was carrying was a shotgun in a patrol car. Many times these have been replaced with some form of automatic weapon. I don't know whether it's AR-15 or that, but what about this providing equivalent firepower to some of the incidents that we're seeing now with active shooters, types of weapons they have, the amount of ammunition they have? I remember there's a movie, I want to say, I was going to look this up, it's called Heat, where there's a California incident where I think bank robbers came out and they were armed to the tooth with weapons and body armor. You know what I'm talking about there. That was the extreme event. But
I know what you're talking about, and let's set the record straight here.
Yeah.
No police officer on the street carries an automatic weapon.
Okay.
That's not, these are semi-automatic.
Right.
They're the civilian version of an AR-15.
Yeah. They
are a rifle. They shoot a .223, which is a very small caliber, relatively low velocity bullet. And to a certain extent, it is to match the firepower that we are seeing on the street.
Yeah.
And the episode that you're talking about was the North Hollywood bank robbery many years ago. Yeah. And these guys were armed to the teeth. The patrol officers from the LAPD that showed up had handguns, nothing more.
Yeah.
And they could not stop these guys.
Yeah.
And there was a long firefight in the street. Eventually, officers went to a sporting goods store and appropriated rifles to be able to stop these guys.
Yeah.
And that's really the only thing that did it when all was said and done.
Yeah.
So that made us look at our tactics again. A shotgun is a good weapon in certain circumstances, but again, it shoots out bullets everywhere, rounds everywhere.
Right.
Shot pellets.
Yes.
And sometimes it doesn't work. So not all, but many of our deputies and police officers carry a patrol rifle. It's much more accurate than a handgun. It has longer range than a handgun. Yeah. The type of bullet that's used is not going to penetrate buildings or walls like a handgun will. It splatters. But it also has enough firepower that it can stop a bad guy from a farther distance away. So it's just an evolution, if you will, of police tactics and weapons.
And part of that evolution, and there's been a lot of debate on this, is that the police sometimes look like active duty military. They got helmets, they have body armor. Some SWAT teams even wear camouflage fatigues, which I'm not in favor of because I think it sends the wrong message personally. But so what about the militarization of the typical police force, like King County Sheriff's Office?
If you have a SWAT team, for example, that has heavy-duty weapons, that has helmets, that has flak jackets, that has camouflage, and they are approaching a school that has been taken over by an active shooter, and maybe they have an armored vehicle to be able to do that, you're really not going to care that they look like the military if they're killing your kids, right?
Yes.
Where you don't want them decked out like that is in a Ferguson situation, like they did in Ferguson. Huge mistake. Many other situations where you don't need that level of gear, and yet they do it, and they bring it against the public.
Yeah.
Whether
You
it's
don't need a sniper on top of the armored vehicle pointing at the crowd.
not at the crowd, in a civil disobedience type of situation. So the reality is, it's not the equipment that they have, it's how they use it. And if we keep it locked up in a warehouse until we have that school shooting, you're really not going to care. But when we have that school shooting, you'll be darn glad that it's there. So that's the distinction we need to make. But the militarization of the police is absolutely real. When you have the federal government giving MRAPs, which is an Afghanistan war machine that's mine resistant, that's
huge, big.
Huge and big, and local police don't need that. They do need armored vehicles, and we've got 2. Sheriff's Office has 2. They do need those, but we don't have any of those other militarized vehicles, vehicles from the military.
Okay.
And in fact, since I've been sheriff, I have sent back to the military equipment that's been acquired over the years by previous sheriffs. Because I don't want it, we don't need it, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the militarization of the police, most of it's bad, some of it's absolutely necessary.
You know, another real world event was the Shoreline shooter, if you remember that.
Very much so.
Memorial Day weekend, here this guy had killed a couple people, ended up in a house full of guns.
Just by coincidence.
By coincidence,
Yes.
armed again to the teeth, to the tooth, or whatever. And one of the officers arriving there was almost killed there. And
Another one was wounded by rifle fire from the suspect.
I kind of remember the armored vehicle playing a role in that particular event. It's been probably 15, 20 years.
Well, we didn't have the armored vehicle there at the time, didn't get there. And we had an officer that was wounded, and we had another officer that drove in a patrol car and rescued her. But that's a situation where you need an armored vehicle, but you don't need a mine-resistant, a bomb-resistant vehicle to do that.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
Let's kind of wrap up here. You know, certainly the other element we've seen in the United States is a significant number of people, personally, civilians, arming themselves, being authorized, a concealed weapons permit. So what should or they should not do, should a civilian do when they encounter an active shooter incident? Maybe they're there, maybe the police are there already, or the police aren't there already. What's your advice to, now you have an armed civilian authorized to carry a concealed weapon?
Well, let's talk about a civilian carrying a weapon in the first place. And I oftentimes get asked, well, should I buy a gun? You know, should I carry a gun? And I never answer that question because I don't know you. I don't know if you are qualified to, you should carry a weapon because of your experience. You shouldn't because you don't have the experience, what you're training, all those types of situations. And the same thing goes into, you know, if I'm in the middle of a robbery, if I'm in the middle of an active shooter situation, should I pull my gun out and use it? I don't know, and I can't tell you yes or no. All I can tell you is what to watch out for. And the main thing you should watch out for, other than the bad guy, is when the good guys get there, are we going to shoot you because we think you are the bad guy? And boy, oh boy, that happens. It's called friendly fire. That happens to police officers as well. My guys, myself included, and the women that work for me, if they're ever in a situation where they're in plain clothes and they have to pull their gun, they better make darn sure that those other responding officers know who they are. And we are aware of that. We train for that. We have a badge. All those type of things that a civilian doesn't.
When they put a vest on, or even just your usual uniform. Now, big on the back, police, you know, so you can identify who.
That's exactly right. But if you're out, if you're with your family, if you're going to a movie, you're not going to have that type of, the police aren't going to have that type of equipment, including a vest. Got to be very, very careful, or we will shoot you by accident, and we don't want to do that.
You know, specific to that, I was reading in the FBI building up there, you know, agents killed in line of duty, and one of them was an officer or an agent arriving late to a scene. It was already been secured, and as that person entered the scene with a gun drawn, was shot by fellow agents. So what you just described is very real.
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
And that was a trained officer, agent, interacting with other agents and having that happen. So it's an individual choice. Well, anything, just to wrap up today, any final thoughts about the active shooter, people feeling safe in their communities, or what? You're the chief law enforcement officer for King County. You have a lot of responsibilities.
There are
for it?
300 million people in this country. There are over 300 million guns. Active shooters are not going to go away anytime soon. That means we, the police, have to be prepared for them, and the public has to be prepared to do something when it happens to them.
Okay.
That would be my advice. Just, it could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen in your neighborhood.
We appreciate you being on the show. A souvenir is the Disaster Zone cup there. I'm sure you need another coffee cup.
You can always take another coffee cup.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So thanks for being on the show, and be safe, and best to all your officers.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, thank you. And this brings us to the end of our show for today. Thanks for tuning in, learning more about active shooters and what you and others can do to become better prepared for those types of events and disasters in general. Remember, if you're going to get prepared for disasters, today is a good day to start. Have a great day, and tune in again soon. Bye-bye.